All right, I'm going to ask you to turn back this way again, and we're going to go into the next segment and talk about the next issue. So what if it's worse than them just not cooperating? What if they're just wrong? What do we do when they're wrong? You know, like I said before, so what if they really abandon their faith? What if they are involved in incredibly sinful habits? What if they're making some awful choices? That's not a matter of opinion, it's just wrong. What do you do? How about do what Jesus did? How about that? Would that be a good idea? I want to remind you of a passage that I think is really, really significant. It's John 1:14. And let me read for you what it says. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. And I want to focus on the last phrase, full of grace and truth. Now, this particular phrase, full of grace and truth, doesn't mean that Jesus was 50% grace and 50% truth, so when you put it all together, He was full. That's not what it means. What it means is He was full of grace and full of truth. 100% filled up with truth, 100% filled up with grace. That's this description of Jesus. Now, here's my premise. If your son or daughter or their spouses are in the position that I just talked about, they likely are cutting off other Christian relationships as well. Is that true? You know, if they're just defiant and they're making wrong choices, they probably don't let any other Christian influences come very close. Now, you know what that means? That as their parent, because you're their parent, you're probably the only Jesus they see. You see, this verse starts off, it says, the Word became flesh and we have seen His glory. We saw the glory of the Father in Jesus, and your son or daughter-in-law or their spouse, daughter or son-in-law, you may be the only Jesus they see because they're shutting everybody else out. You still get a chance to be in because of the relationship, because you're a parent. So here you have the chance to be Jesus to them. But here's a really interesting question. So if full of grace, Jesus was full of grace and full of truth. But what did He lead with? What did He lead with people? Well, you know what? With the Pharisees, He led with truth. I mean, He let them have it. You ever want to do that with your son or daughter-in-law? I mean, you just want to lead with truth. You just, boom. After all, they're wrong, you know? They're wrong, so you just want to tell them. You just want to tell them they're wrong. And sometimes we find these little sneaky ways to tell them they're wrong. But we lead with truth. But we're talking about when your son or your daughter or their spouses are involved in sin. How did Jesus treat people that were involved in sin? You know what? He led with grace. Think about the story in John 8 of the woman caught in adultery. Remember, the religious leaders bring the lady to Jesus? And they say she was caught in act. I don't know if they actually caught her in bed. I mean, this is an open shut case. I mean, she was caught in the act. Caught in the act. And they wanted Jesus to do what? Lead with truth. They asked Jesus to speak truth. What do you say, Jesus? And remember what Jesus did? Instead of leading with truth, He knelt down on the ground and started writing in the sand. And I don't know what He wrote in the sand. I don't know if He started writing the names of some other women, that some of those men, you know. I don't know what He wrote. But He started writing in the sand. And they get convicted, and before long, all of these religious leaders have disappeared. And Jesus says to the woman, where are your accusers? And she says, they've all gone. And He says, well, then neither do I condemn you. You see, He led with grace. Not to the neglect of truth. As as he sensed that she was then willing to hear the truth, then he spoke the truth to her. He said, go and sin no more. He called it sin. He called it what it was. But he led with grace. Now, some of you, if you have a daughter or a son-in-law that is doing that, your tendency is to want to lead with truth. You know how truth sounds? Truth sounds in statements like this. You know what you really need to... Anybody ever say that to them? You know, I was teaching this a few weeks ago, and one of the ladies in class raised her hand, and she said, you know what I say? She says, I say the Bible says. You know, as if she was trying to make it more effective by saying the Bible says. Well, that's really speaking truth, and it probably put up a huge wall. What happens if you speak truth and they're not ready to hear it? Doesn't the wall just go up higher and higher and higher? So we say things like, don't you know? Don't you know? And we make these kind of truth statements. We lead with truth. And every time we lead with truth, we build a wall a little bit higher between us and them. Jesus used grace to break down the wall so that he could speak truth, and so truth would be heard. What does truth sound like? You know what what does grace sound like? You know what grace sounds like sometimes? Saying nothing. Sometimes grace sounds like, I really appreciate. Sometimes grace sounds like, I understand. How can you lead with grace? I want you to do something. Everybody stand on your feet. You'll think that I'm really into track and field. It kind of was. I actually ran in track and field when I was young and a bunch of pounds lighter. But here's what I want you to do. I want everybody to get into a running stance. Not down on all fours, just like you're getting ready to run a race, okay? Everybody get that. Now, here's what I want you to do. Look down at your feet. Which one is in front, right or left? If your right foot is in front, raise your hand. All right, if your left foot is in front, raise your hand. All right, now, here's what I want you to do. Switch feet. Put the other one in front. How's it feel? Kind of weird, doesn't it? Okay, sit back down. That was your race for the day, okay? Now, here's because we've been parents, and because we've been in control, and because we've been in a position of authority, the natural tendency for us to do is to lead with truth. So that foot that you put in front that felt right, that's your truth foot. Some of you need to do something that feels a little awkward, and that's put the grace foot in front. Lead with grace. Listen to this. If they really need to hear truth, they may only hear it if you offer grace first. Some of you have been trying to tell your adult child the truth for several years. How's it working for you? You getting anywhere? So let me give you an experiment. What if for a year you led with grace? You just say, I'm going to commit myself to 1 year of leading with grace. You think that it might begin to break the wall down and get them to the point where they might listen? So if your son or daughter-in-law or their spouse is there, I want to encourage you to do that. Here's what I want you to do. In your groups, discuss how this principle of leading with grace applies in your relationships right now. Okay? Go.